So people keep living vegan cheese into things, and then I get sick. So I'm sick of vegan. Okay, that's the second bit. Ready? The third bit involves Piper and Oren. Piper, get over here. Piper, what's your favorite milk?
Oat milk.
Oren, get over here. Oren, what's your favorite milk?
Whole milk directly from the cow.
Okay, that's it. Thank you. Thrifted. This motion before us today is whether this house would go vegan. Definitions-wise, I think this is a pretty easy debate. Going vegan entails this house would stop eating animals or products derived from animal bodies. Further iterations of veganism do exist, but let's keep it at that for now. Now, as far as I can see, there are two approaches here. One is the PETA approach, appealing to human emotions in some capacity. This is like the classic commercial with the sad cow eyes, or like comparing your chicken and your dog, and like, oh, you're so sad, whatever, we get it. Now, as far as I see it, that approach doesn't work, because an appeal to empathy doesn't work. Why? Probably because in all reality, it's impossible to fathom the huge amount of suffering our day-to-day actions cause. Every day we use phones made in sweatshops, dump pollution into the atmosphere, order things from terrible corporations, use single-use plastics, go to a school that recently apparently reopened ties with Israeli institutions, and so much more. Yeah, you thought this was going to be not serious, but this is getting real. Realistically, none of us have the bandwidth to really grasp even a fraction of everything we do in our day-to-day lives, much less the emotional capacity to feel bad about all of it. So rather than taking the emotional approach, I'm going to take a second approach, a more rationally oriented one. I'm doing this for two reasons. One, it's much easier to deal with an issue like this in the abstract for the reasons listed above. If we can abstract away from the scope and depth of the issue to ideal cases, we can actually understand what we're talking about. The second is that probably the best defense why we shouldn't go vegan is that humans are different from animals in such a way that while cannibalism is pretty much universally opposed, we're largely okay with people eating animals. So now one of the primary arguments for this definition is that humans are rational. They have self-concepts, can have hopes and dreams, can plan for future things, and are more intelligent and a higher form of life than animals beneath them. This argument has its issues, but I'll take it at face value. What I'm going to do in this speech is accept the idea that human rationality differentiates them, and then argue that if humans are indeed rational, they should not want to eat or use animals in the first place, given their other moral preferences. In other words, if humans think that certain actions are not okay, then humans are rationally compelled to also believe that killing and using animals are not okay for the same reasons. And if OP is going to claim that not being vegan is actually an emotional or rational decision, then they have to explain why an irrational, emotional being like a human is different from animals at all. Okay, with that groundwork laid, I'm now going to lay out the argument which borrows a lot from philosopher Robert Nozick so that I don't get accusations of plagiarism. I'll begin with the premise that we all believe that animals hold some moral value. This is a pretty easy for everyone in the chamber idea to accept. If somebody told you that they spent their weekends finding rabbits to torture, you'd probably judge them at least a little bit. This even extends to something as small as insects. If somebody put down stomping on anthills as a hobby on their Hinge profile, you would swipe left. So we can all agree that animals aren't just objects we can use however we wish. So then what allows us to use animals for food? presumably because the animals are providing us caloric sustenance. Their loss of life or a complete control of them, such as in the dairy industry, is not going to waste. But we don't need animals for that caloric sustenance. Vegetarianism and veganism are both extremely viable and often cheaper options here in Ireland. So the purpose behind eating meat can't really be caloric necessity when other options are available. The reason people continue to choose meat and animal products is simply because they enjoy it more than the vegan options. So the real reason people continue to eat animal products is the extra margin of enjoyment derived from consuming animal products over the vegan alternative, not from a need for sustenance. We can then ask, is that extra margin of enjoyment worth the animal suffering? Now here, Opp could double down and say, yes, that humans as higher life forms are valid in their right to use and kill other animals for their enjoyment. Now here, I'm going to employ that rationality that I spoke about before. But before I do so, I want to set aside something that I apparently left in the other chamber. Oh well. I'm going to talk about something that Opp should agree with theoretically, and that is the following statement. I believe that for the sake of human enjoyment, it is okay to use and kill animals. Do any of you have any issues with that? Okay, you're okay with that, great. Now with that accepted, I want to use that conclusion to make a rationally equivalent conclusion. If human enjoyment in the form of culinary experience is an acceptable end for which we can sacrifice animals, there should be no issue with other forms of human enjoyment which also sacrifices animals. As the philosopher Robert Nozick brought up, if someone gets enjoyment out of hitting a baseball with a bat, but gets more enjoyment out of smashing the heads of animals with bats, why should we ban them from smashing animal heads? If we can eat meat because we get an extra margin of enjoyment out of a beef burger versus a mushroom burger, why can't we hit a cow's head rather than a baseball because he gets an extra margin of enjoyment out of that? But you know what? Maybe the baseball analogy isn't hitting. Okay, that actually got a laugh, wow. Instead of a dying American sport, let me give an example closer to the young adult Irish mind. I believe that based on the statement that you all just agreed to, you all are in support of bestiality. And I applaud you for that. We listen and we don't judge. Bestiality is just one more example of this principle, just far more taboo. But really, if someone gets more enjoyment out of fucking a goat than a human, why should we tell them that they can't do that? Because at the end of the day, what really is the difference between culinary pleasure and sexual pleasure? They're both just different forms of enjoyment. And sometimes, depending on which end you're using, culinary and sexual pleasure can go together. So, unless Opp can posit some relevant difference in the enjoyment between sex and food, then the argument for why we shouldn't allow bestiality has to apply for eating animal products too. And I'm assuming that all of Opp is not okay with bestiality, unless they are, in which case I will be upstairs after the debate. Otherwise, vote against bestiality, vote for veganism, vote prop. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be a tough act to follow. Quick disclaimer. I've never fucked a goat. I've no interest in fucking a goat. I doubt anyone else in this room wants to do that either. I hope. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Hist, my name is Lily Scanlon, and I'm honoured to not be representing Lostock tonight, opposing the motion that this house would go vegan. Before I'd start, I'd like to say that when I first saw this motion back in January, it was hard to know straight away which side I wanted to go on. Now it's pretty obvious, but anyway. And I wanted to keep an open mind. But see, that was before I had tried vegan cheese. This brings me to my first point. You simply just don't know how bad something is until you've tried it. Before I tried veganism, for example, I, like many others, I'm sure, saw it as a very ethical and healthy way of life. Some may even see it as a sort of renewal or spiritual cleansing. That's why James Ryan thought it would be a fantastic idea for everyone in Lostock to go vegan after we got cancelled last month. And as a white girl boss feminist, I jumped on the idea. It's probably best if we don't get that one. I wanted to do this right, and I'm aware that there's quite a lot of stigma around being vegan. Oh, I forgot my cards. And I didn't want to fall victim to the many false and quite offensive stereotypes like around the lifestyle. So of course, before I did this, I consulted my most trusted confidant. It's a really big one. ChatGPT. And together, we constructed a strict, yet balanced and very human meal plan so that I could have the most immersive experience possible. I need to finish this bite with though. It's called Vegan is Victory, and we coined it ourselves. And all day yesterday, I followed it rigorously. 9 a.m., wake up. 9:15 a.m., rehydrate, consume 3.5 cartons of almond milk, unsweetened. 9:30 a.m., chia seeds. 9:45, more chia seeds. 10 a.m., chia seeds. 11 a.m., banana. 12 p.m., chia seeds. 2 p.m., finish that almond milk. Sure, go on.
I struggle to see the issue here. That all sounds delicious.
Oh, I'm having a great time. I'm immersing myself. I'll get to the point. 3 p.m., touch some grass. By evening time, I was exhausted. I'd written nothing for opposition. Law Sock was still cancelled. And I didn't feel so good. So I played around with my quinoa bowl that night. Was this truly the absence of veganism? I was still committed to the cause. And before delivering my final verdict, I wanted to be sure. Rare as they are, there is one known vegan on campus. I'm so sorry for this. It was really into it. Sorry, okay. But there was one problem. No one had seen him in years. Legend has it, on a quest to discover his divine purpose, he retired to the tranquility of nature, more commonly known as the Hist library. I took a deep breath before knocking on the door 3 times. Just like that, it opened, and appearing in a cloud of ethical animal smoke was Toby Fern. Explaining my predicament, I asked him what the deal was with veganism, because at that moment in time, I just couldn't see the point of it all. Perhaps I was speaking too fast, but perhaps all those years of hiding away in the G&B attic, chewing leaves, had done him no good, because he spoke as follows. To gain the wisdom of the tree, you must answer me these riddles 3. I wrote this today. He told me that I would need to take a journey into my soul, and then tried to sell me Philball tickets and a bump of oregano. He was still talking to himself when I left. I went home that night completely defeated, exhausted. I sat down to watch season 2 of Severance and started tucking into a tub of Ben & Jerry's fish food. Fuck, it's dairy! My diet is ruined! But that's when I realized. Why was I so caught up in adopting a lifestyle that isn't even that good for the world anyway? A widespread shift to veganism could significantly reduce demand for animal products. I mean, just think about all the meat companies that would go out of business. Think of all the Irish mammy TikTokers, I'm getting to you, don't worry, who would be out of the job. What's your favorite corn fillet roll topping? Roll topping just didn't hit the same as before. What are we meant to ask celebrities when Joe.ie interviews them now? Actual questions about their movie? God, no. Without the crutch of our national snack, we're hopeless. Even more pressing, think about big meat. No, actually, don't think about big meat. Think about the thousands of jobs being lost, is what I'm trying to say. And it's fairly difficult to tell the millions in the associated industries that they're now redundant and need to cultivate kale or risk death by vegan vigilantes. I'm okay. I'm really fine. Thanks, though. Increased demand for specific crops, for example, soy or almonds, can lead to deforestation, water scarcity, and biodiversity loss. For example, soybean cultivation for plant-based products is linked to deforestation in the Amazon, something the meat industry has definitely no ties to at all. My final point, plants have feelings too. That carrot's crying. Famed visionary and technically my landlord, L. Ron Hubbard, tested the pain tolerance of tomatoes. The results of his experiments, they had no mouths and yet they needed to scream. Do we not have remorse for the organisms we destroy because they lack soulful eyes or furry exteriors? Does consciousness qualify one to avoid slaughter? Do you think the US signal group chat will let airstrike Colombia? We're drawing a very arbitrary line as to where we stop the killing. Organisms are still being extinguished and cannibalized after all, and as the great L. Ron proved, we're inflicting untold damage on our plant brethren. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a point to veganism, but it doesn't seem to be a lifestyle my bank account and my carbon footprint can afford, so I guess I'll never know. I was sitting in the arts block benches today, sipping an iced passion fruit matcha coconut milk latte. Some things stick. When I noticed a familiar face walking across the green. It's the vegan. With McDonald's Big Mac in hand. Not only was this pretender not a vegan, but he wasn't even vegetarian. Perhaps the scent of grass wasn't a good enough basis to go off after all. For now, I'll finish my speech. Save a cow, eat a vegan.
I still have a carrot here. This is really exciting. Thank you. Okay. I also dressed up as a cow today, just as an aside. But I was outdone. Okay, I'm going to begin this debate by asserting, I was actually going to begin the debate, but I'm no longer, so ignore that. I'm going to begin my speech by asserting that we on the proposition should not be viewed as being on the back foot, right? Just because veganism is not the status quo does not mean that it is some radical shift that merits must be scrupulously assessed, okay? Tradition does not entail supremacy. It is just as imperative for the opposition to justify the consumption of animals and animal products as it is for us to outline why this is a problematic position. With that out of the way, let me begin my argument. Veganism is the only legitimate moral position. I will be beginning by arguing for vegetarianism, then extending this to veganism. I'm doing this because if you accept the merit of vegetarianism, this entails veganism, as I will outline. Why the murder of animals is wrong must be substantiated. We as human beings are different from non-humans, as we've discussed, are we not? We can use reason, we can hope, reflect. There's an extensive list of the cognitive abilities that we have that are unfound in animals that make the distinction between us clear. One of the most basic parts of our moral code, which, it's not universal and can come under critique, okay, is that of a right to life. Why we may have this, but do animals? Is it simply our ability to reason that prevents our justified murder? There exist human beings that have less cognitive function. There exist comatose patients. Are we justified in making the executive decision to end their lives? I cannot imagine you would affirm, at least I hope. No POIs, please. Okay. Is it not imperative to protect all living beings? What of morality? Is it not the very thing that distinguishes us from other animals? That our capacity to reason enables us to think and act in a moral way, to aim to attain moral virtue. Since animals as living sentient beings of course have a natural interest in not suffering and indeed in living, is it not our moral obligation to prevent this suffering, to prevent undue harm and death, to protect those who are innocent of anything that would entail such a fate, those that need to be protected, since there is no rationale for them to suffer this fate? I believe this extends the pertinence of vegetarianism, due to the interest to life, to veganism, due to the suffering that the exploitation of animal products entails. But then you say, we do have a reason, perhaps a necessity to,
So then, in a world where the extraction of dairy is purely ethical, doesn't that mean would you support vegetarianism rather than veganism?
yeah, but that doesn't happen, that doesn't exist. Also, there's other animal products that can't happen. Okay, thank you. You derailed my argument. We need them to remain healthy. We need animal products to remain healthy. Vitamin adequate, which my friend laughed at me with that phrasing, but I don't know, like vitamin deficient, what's the opposite? I don't know. This is an absurd argument, okay? Is there anyone who could say, without falsity nor farce, that it is only through meat that we can get sufficient and proper nutrition? Veganism could provide the full slate of nutritional benefits, by the way, actually at a pretty okay cost, just to make that point. There are relatively cheap supplements that provide additional vitamins to those who need it. Even without these, a full nutritional diet is possible in veganism. In fact, a diet made predominantly from veggies and beans and the like is significantly more healthy than one composed largely of red meats. I must make one point clear. It is not my position to say that veganism has always been the only justifiable position, okay? Previously, people had less resources than we do. They may have needed not only to gather, but indeed to hunt, hunter-gatherer reference, for their livelihood. Furthermore, there are those in the current age for which veganism is an unsuitable lifestyle, whether it's due to economic means or otherwise. Certain societies, a non-vegan diet may be much cheaper than the alternative due to the economy being structured around animal farms, George Orwell reference, etc. The main reason why many vegans might not get enough vitamins is due to the effort of buying all these ingredients and putting them together in a meal, not the cost. But this actually also happens for non-vegans, for those who engage in carnivory, new word. As students, we all know about the diet of noodles and bread, etc., like coffee and cigarettes. This is not healthy. We can't blame veganism or non-veganism for this poor diet. Like, for example, a simple tomato sauce pasta can be made in 20 minutes. Throw in some peas and the likes. That is a nutritious meal, okay? So my argument for animals desiring life is outlined as simple. Any sentient being is interested in continued life. This is what determines their existence. It cannot be separated from another facet of their being, and thus it must be desirable. However, let's look more at suffering. You may be thinking of the farms in which animals are kept in suitable conditions, such as open pasture cows. Are these animals suffering? Does the cow care about being milked? Does the chicken care about their eggs being collected? Maybe not. But the owning of animals for this specific purpose of collecting their produce, whether for consumption or sale, entails a lack of care for these animals, even if they are not ill-treated or subjected to physical pain. For example, taking cows' calves off them must cause emotional stress for both parties. Even if some animals can be kept ethically, the scale of the market for animal produce entails the promotion of obtaining the maximum amount of produce with minimum cost. I found it really hard not to say capitalism here, but I said it anyway. This involves methods in factory farms, such as the slicing off of hens' beaks. I didn't know about this. Slicing off of hens' beaks and the cramming of them and other animals into tiny cages, causing death or broken bones and other worse fates. Male chickens get ground alive, over 200 million a year in the US alone. Even if certain animal produce is produced morally, we should not accept this slight win for the trade-off that non-veganism entails. That is billions of unnecessary animal deaths and animals subjected to indescribable pain. It would be remiss of me to not acknowledge an embedded issue in this debate. That is, making any universal claim to morality is problematic. There's a vast range of cultural practices and differing moral codes that, while do not align with my own personal views, can be unilaterally deemed wrong. There are certain societies that have moral reasoning or religious cultural reason behind it, and I can't stand here and say that's wrong. Veganism, to force upon them a vegan imperative would be so destructive to their culture and identity that it would not be warranted. Veganism may be the only morally justifiable way to live, but its imposition is not always. Sometimes its imposition will be so disruptive as to be ultimately destructive. For the sake of morality, this would not be a tenable position because the trade-off is not good. Veganism as a position overcomes any claims to the pleasure, necessity, or convenience of animal produce. If you agree with the moral importance of animals, thus supporting their right to live and not suffer, you're a vegan. At least you should be, once you assess this reasoning and the logical inconsistencies in non-veganism. It is an ethical choice, but as with all ethical choices, it requires effort and commitment. But it's worth it. This house would go vegan. The question is not about, whether animals can reason or talk, but can they suffer? Jeremy Bentham. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I'd like to talk about those carrots. They were disgusting. And if you're a vegan, you have to eat those for the rest of your life. Exactly. Thank you. But I'd like to open with this little story. A story from when I was 11 and I was a child, spending my summer in my home country, Bangladesh. See, back home, both sides of my family, they're from poor farming villages. They primarily farmed rice, but on occasion, they had cattle, and they kept cattle for milk and for living purposes. And I'd slaughtered chickens before. It's a farming village. I held down the chickens. I've cut their throats. It's a normal thing. But I will always remember the first cow I watched be slaughtered. Every day I walked past that cow. We had a compound of grass and fields surrounding our house, and I always saw that exact cow roaming, wandering, eating grass. And the last week of the summer, I came back home to find the cow tied. That was the first time I'd ever seen ropes around it. The first time I'd ever seen its freedom restricted. The cow was tied, and I remember sitting there for half an hour, and after a while, I saw my uncle, who had been sharpening a blade for 10 minutes. He took that blade to the cow's throat, and in one swift movement, took its life. It was uneasy. It was weird. It was something I'd never seen before, and in one swift transition, the cow went from life to death. See, this was for the Islamic tradition of Eid al-Adha, where an animal is sacrificed. And only 1/4 of that cow's meat went towards my family. 3/4 of that meat, hundreds of pounds, was distributed to the poor people around the village. These are people who couldn't afford meat, people who are malnourished, and people who saw meat as a privilege that only we could provide, and one they needed to survive. I was scared, as any 11-year-old would be, watching an animal be slaughtered in front of them, watching the blood flow. And it was normal for everyone else but me. But looking back, I would not change a thing, because it taught me that no matter how scary the process might be, veganism has no place, it has no future, and sacrifices must be made. First and foremost, I have one thing to say to everybody here: don't feel bad. Because that is what Proposition wants. They want you to feel bad. They want you to think that every bite of meat you take, you're cruelly snuffing the innocent life of Millie the cow. No, thank you. It is the height of obnoxiousness to believe that there is some moral chasm between vegans and non-vegans. Yes, animals are living beings. They sleep, they breathe, they procreate. But it's a nice thought. It's nice to think about the idea that maybe we shouldn't kill them. But it's not true, it's not realistic, and it can never be deemed evil. Because as much as we treasure their life is attached to and continuously made for the purpose of their death. It is part of a circle of life, and it's not immoral to be part of that circle. No, thank you. Don't let it be twisted. It's not simply the fact that it's natural that we should say it's moral, but the fact that it's essential in nature. The lion hunts the gazelle. Sorry, 1 second, I lost my part. The lion hunts the gazelle, the wolf hunts the sheep, the piranha hunts the lawsock. There will always be predators and prey, and the circle of life is always around us. The consumption of animals serves a purpose. Whether you're a person or a lion, that purpose alone gives it moral justification. False equivalencies such as bestiality, please no. False equivalencies such as bestiality cannot be used for comparison, because unlike other gruesome uses of animal lives, anti-veganism, consuming the animals, eating them, using them in our daily lives, this is a purpose that has always been around, has always been justified, and one that serves us naturally and morally. Painting veganism as the moral alternative is a privileged view which looks past the reality that morals are embedded in the world around us. If it was truly immoral to eat an animal, that morality wouldn't shift because you are poor or a broke student. But the very fact that we say that people who are broke should be entitled to eat meat, or people who are malnourished should be entitled to meat, tells us that there is a line between humans and animals, and there is morality in us slaughtering them. But the poor cows, that's what I always hear, sorry. That's what I always hear. Tabib, the poor cows and their moos, don't you hear them? Don't you feel bad? Exactly. And I do feel bad. I feel bad until I'm treated to steak on the lawsock bill. It all goes away. It all goes away. But in all seriousness, empathy is a big thing. It is why a lot of people go vegan. They can't imagine subjecting animals to death and farming simply so we can eat and enjoy. But it's not that simple. Empathy is nuanced and has to be grounded in reality, and only goes so far. Animals are born and bred with a purpose, and a cow's moo does not hold the same weight as a baby's cry. Adam. Is a person not a human? There's an inherent distinction between a human and a person who has an intent. There's an inherent distinction between a human with a potential and the rationality of thought and the IQ. And if you just look at it on a metaphysical level, humans are humans, animals are not humans. That's why it's okay to give them a purpose from the moment of their birth. A cow's moo, no, does not hold the same. Oh, sorry, yes.
So if we made a genetic hybrid between a human and a cow, would their purpose be to reason and be like a human being, or to be eaten?
Get back to me when you make one. That's a moral issue you don't have to face yet. Please wait. Animals are born and bred with a purpose, and no life outside that purpose for many of them. No understanding outside that purpose. Fulfilling that purpose is not evil or unempathetic or immoral. A rigid, absolutist view on veganism centered in empathy ignores the value of tradition and the role of animal consumption in history and in nature. Empathy is nice, but when it's used as a reason to go vegan, it's not arguable. It's a sheltered view and ignores the reality of the need for animal produce. The place for empathy is in ethical consumption. It does not overpower our needs and wants for animal produce, as those needs and wants are well established, have always been first, and should come first. But rather, ethical consumption is a better model. It's a model where we are empathetic to them to a point which is reasonable to us. We have the power, and it is our duty to be empathetic and be ethical where we can. We do not have to go the entire way. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition will say that we should go vegan because we can. Because in this modern society, in Western society, there are vegan alternatives, and that reason alone tells us we should go vegan. It's not true, and it never will be. Animal produce has a role and value in society. That means no matter what you think, you should never go vegan. Vegan alternatives are always brought up. Cream cheese, vegan meats, you name it. They're all horrible. They're all bad for you. We're told because they exist, we should opt for them, that their existence gets rid of any justification, but it's not true. Vegan options will never measure up. As someone who grew up on vegan options, who grew up in the West and unable to eat meat that wasn't halal, I grew up eating vegetarian and vegan options. It was never the same. I remember going out with my friends, they had their juicy Big Macs, and I had the slop of a vegan burger. That thing traumatized me for years. That slop will never have the same nutritional value. No amount of artificial meat, scientific research, or plant alternatives will match the nutritional value we need from actual meat. You may find other sources of protein, of key minerals, of key nutrients, but never as organic, never as fresh, and never as unrefined or unprocessed. We need animal produce. Our bodies need it. We evolved to need it, and there's no reason to abstain from it. I could go on and on about how much I love meat or animal produce, how much I'd kill for a smash burger or I'd kill for a steak. And I think that's true for everyone here, as because the majority of us have not gone vegan and probably will never go. But the truth is, we don't feel bad because it is inherent to us to not feel bad. And as someone who has fasted all day and is extremely hungry, I have a piece of beautiful tandoori chicken here that I've been waiting to eat all day. Please don't go vegan, thank you.
So you have to eat it beforehand. Just before I start my speech, does anyone have like problems with loud noises or loud people?
I'm the closest to you.
Okay. Good to know. All right, so. Ladies and gentlemen, chair adjudicators, I'm not a philosophy student, I'm not an ethics student, I'm not a law student. I don't really think in ethics or quandaries about my place in the universe or how vital it is to eat animals or not. I'm an English and film student, all right? I think in images, in descriptions. So for this speech, I want you to imagine something. A mountain crossing through the Earth's atmosphere, made entirely of animal shit. I am going to be making the argument that we should go vegan not because animals feel emotion, we should not kill them because empathy, blah, blah, blah. We need to kill them, or we need to stop killing them. We need to stop killing animals because they are the greatest threat, or one of the greatest threats, to human survival, being with the emissions that they create out of their anuses. This is a climate change argument. So yeah, on to my point. Why do we need to stop animal-based dieting? Simple. Animals and agriculture as a whole is the largest producer of methane, one of the largest greenhouse gas emitters, which is leading to the destruction of the human ozone, which will obviously lead to the death of our entire species. I'd say this outweighs a lot of empathy or we need to eat it because regardless of if you survive on meat or not, if we keep letting this happen, then eventually we're all going to burn alive when the sun's unfiltered rays come and burn our skin off. So yeah, I think we can all agree that this is useful, and this is more useful than just eating meat because it tastes good. So methane emissions rise from animal farming, particularly their manure and flatulence, like I've said, regardless of if they're eaten or if they're simply used for eggs and milk, so vegetarianism as well. It will animals create upwards of 100 megatons of methane per year. That's more than 100 billion kilograms, or enough manure to make up 2 Great Walls of China. Imagine that. Another environmental harm of animal farming is the agricultural damage that it does, the prevalence of monocultures with these animal farmings. See, Animals are fed often with one type of crop, which is usually grass. So farmers deforest large areas, getting rid of biodiversity and trees, which absorb a lot of greenhouse gases, so that they can make room for the grass that these animals need to eat. On top of this, yeah.
What if we just didn't do deforestation on monocultures?
Then we wouldn't have enough animals to feed the entire planet, so we need to go vegan. That's what I'm getting onto. In conventional monoculture settings, they need a lot of moisture to irrigate their crops. This means that they do it artificially, which leads to overflowing of certain natural resources and poisoning of natural water reservoirs and aquatic life, which is bad because, destroying the environment is bad, as I've mentioned. And fields are only grown with one type of crop, which removes essential nutrients, meaning that farmers have to use artificial soil fertilizer in order to replenish those nutrients, which also emit a lot of greenhouse gases. And as I've mentioned, those are bad. By going vegan, we greatly reduce the amount of animal products that's needed. Why? Because it's simple. These animal farms cannot justify paying the same amount of money to produce the same amount of animals if less people are buying them. They make less money. It doesn't make any sense economically. It doesn't matter about morals, ethics, anything like that. Yes? Well, simple. We just stop growing new ones. It's easy. All right? Listen, the opposition may try to say, oh, the industry, but we'll put so many people out of jobs. Do you seriously expect the lovely audience here to expect that farmers do not know how to grow wheat? Really? If they were forced to stop growing cows because it wasn't profiting them economically, then they wouldn't know how to just pivot to growing wheat, growing corn. Really? Is it that hard? I refuse to insult the intelligence of the audience by making that claim. So, we have proved that this is a meaningful switch. Secondly, the continuance of an animal-based diet is unsustainable for the human population. Now, I know this may not be popular to say, but the UN has said that an animal-based diet will not be able to feed the current human population unless we increase production by over 50% without using any more land. This is impossible. We've already resorted to methods like factory farming, where we give animals even less space than they really need. It's basically torture, but we're not making an ethical argument here. But regardless, we already use so much land, and we already pack everything in as much as we can. We're trying to make the process as efficient as possible, and it just doesn't work. Animals need nearly 100 times more land, which is food and water, in order to produce the same amount of protein as tofu or peas. All right? So we can see this is a vastly inefficient system. If we were to switch to a mainly vegan diet, which is predominantly crops, then we would be able to provide enough food for the human population. As we can already see in our world, a lot of people suffer from famine, and this is partially because we have this dependence on meat, which is a very inefficient process. So, yeah. Just blame genetics, all right? It doesn't matter. Some people are born short. All right. Now, to combat what Op may say, obvious points I can think of: it's too expensive, it's not widespread enough, it tastes bad. Yep.
So what actually is the alternative to meat? Because I run track fraternities and no one would like to use vegetarian.
You can take beans and lentils and nuts.
And then they stuff.
Order. You can't speak. Regardless, also we've come so far we can actually synthesize meat. I'm getting onto it because opposition will likely say, it's bad, it tastes bad, it doesn't do enough for you. Listen, veganism is a very niche diet right now. If we were to pivot the market's interest to veganism, make it the mainstream diet, all right, this is my first counterpoint, the market will be forced to not only lower production costs because they want to get into there's going to be a lot of competition. They can't sell it high. They have to reduce prices in order to make it a viable alternative so they can compete in this market. All right, we're going to get an imperfect market structure for all my economic students in the room, all right? So we're going to make it much cheaper. This also means that production strategies are going to make it way more plentiful. We're going to transition more. Also, listen, it may be hard to synthesize substitutes now, but like I said, it's because it's a niche thing. And animal and vegan substitutes have come so far in the brief amount of time that veganism has even been a diet. You couldn't even be vegan 30 years ago. And now all supermarkets stock some type of milk alternative. We have come so far. So I find it hard to believe that if the market switched to veganism as the primary mode of dieting, that we would not see the massive revolutions that came with the meat industry. And the meat industry is already super inefficient, and it's had thousands of years. Why can't we give veganism a few decades to see if it will turn out better? Also, for taste, just use salt and pepper. It's not that hard. Just season your food a little bit. All right? You're out of time. So for all those reasons, because if we don't go vegan, we will destroy our planet, we will destroy ourselves, and if we don't go vegan, we cannot feed our population. For all these reasons, I beg you to propose this motion.
Yeah, Piper.
Is this yours? Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Hello, my name is Ethan McCarthy. I'm not Piper Stevens.
Piper.
Despite what the oratory return may say. Piper, please stand up. Piper stands with me now to affirm that everything I say, Piper wholeheartedly agrees with and backs all that follows over the next 7 minutes or so. I shall essentially speak on Piper Stevens' behalf. She writes to me, Ethan, my greatest confidant, an eloquent, handsome bachelor who has blessed us with your presence in chamber on this Wednesday evening. Piper, you're too kind. It's really all right. My social policy degree requires us to do charity work, so it really is 2 birds with 1 stone. For those that don't get it, I'm in the Phil, the society upstairs. Now that we get that out of the way, I can dive into the meat of my speech, the tender argument I will implore this evening. Piper Stevens and I, despite our stature differences, have quite a lot in common. We both hail from the great state of California, the Bay Area to be precise. She is from a town called Cotati, a rural town outside Santa Rosa, about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. A very crunchy and hippie place. I wonder if this is the hippie and tree-loving youth has any correlation as to why she's not speaking tonight. I digress. Earlier today, Piper was sprawled out on the grass just outside this building and explained to me why she was unable to speak this evening, and it was not due to her hippie youth, but rather that she was too tired and couldn't come up with a chamber speech. However, I said there was discourse, we went back and forth. However, she begged and pleaded with me to take her place and speak in this debate this evening. I said, Piper, my great friend, I would love to help you out with that new society you're at. What is this, the 200th session? My society is centuries old, more wise, more prosperous. I would love to see you join the great societies at Trinity one day. Here I am to encourage you all to stay strong, like an ox, work tirelessly like a salmon swimming upstream, fight like a chicken in a cockfight, like a cow soon to be slaughtered, stay determined, and one day you can be great as the society that also resides in this building. Also, enough with the inspirational talk for this youthful society. I have a joke for y'all. I actually just changed my joke because it was stolen by our chair. So I looked up ChatGPT as well. Why don't vegans argue? Because they don't want any beef. Which is quite funny because I have a lot of beef with this one on proposition at the moment.
Unfounded.
We won't get into that. I know you people in the Hist are more into something called BP. A little unsure as to what that is. Apparently it stands for British Parliament. Seems a little bit un-Irish if you ask me. You guys are not breeding the... Rich for Britain, not beating the West Brit allegations, but I'll give you my best attempt. The reason this House should oppose veganism and the arguments the proposition makes is due to 3 reasons. The moral dilemma made by the proposition that humans should not kill each other and other species is a fallacy and illogical argument that the opposition disagrees with. Secondly, we as humans could not have survived and evolved into humanity that we today, blah, 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 caloric benefit, blah, 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 carnivore diet. I found out at 4:30 I was speaking, so there's a little bit, no. And lastly, a personal anecdote about my 6th au pair. The moral dilemma made by the proposition that humans should not kill each other is a fallacy and illogical argument that they stand on. We as humans hold ourselves... No. We as humans hold ourselves to this erroneous standard of arguing not to kill other animals. Dinosaurs, lions, sharks, tigers, eagles, anteaters, cheetahs, hyenas, wolves, polar bears, seals, alligators, ferrets, Komodo dragons, brown hyenas, and the majority of the mammals all kill other animals. Why are we holding ourselves to this standard? You.
Okay, so to be on your point, like, surely we hold ourselves to a higher ethical standard because we can recognize that we are above these animals and we have a duty as a more evolved species, a more reasoning species, who can provide for themselves with crops.
Badgering. Okay, going on. I'll answer that later, don't worry. So if the opposition is to make this argument that we are the same as other species, equal, as I was saying, like all these tree-hugging animal lovers are saying, sorry, you have one more speaker, don't worry. If we are equal and equal to these beings and other species, why is it the case that we hold ourselves to a higher standard and impose this fallacy on us that killing other animals is immoral if everyone else is doing it, as I listed earlier? 1, and 2, as humans, we kind of like cherry pick our moral dilemmas in this situation. For example, we agree that we can't kill animals, or the proposition agrees that we can't kill animals. However, we continue to deforest their climates, we domesticize them for companionship, and put animals into zoos, amongst a bunch of other immoral dilemmas that you may infer if you adopt this thinking. Yes? Actually, no.
I think most, you said
So if they insist on exploring this relationship, there are many things that we as humans do that people have no issue, however, is never attempted by our counterpart species. This reminds us of logic that actually the proposition brought up from a great book called Animal Farm by George Orwell. It seems that some species are all equal, however, some species are more equal than others. There's an illogical fallacy there, but we'll move on. My second point, we as humans would not have survived and evolved into humanity that we are today. If we look at the historic evolution of humanity, we would not have evolved beyond our humble beings from the days where we lived in caves and survived off buffalo. Our clothes were made of the hide from the skin of these very buffaloes. Our societies were structured by hunters and gatherers. Hunters were the workers, or the warriors, the foundation to our humble beings as humans. The proposition proposes a world where the cultural pinnacle and exemplary idea of culture, marketing, and media would not have been released, the Got Milk advert. This world, these grass-eating delinquents proposed on this proposition is one that is sad, immoral, and lacks reasoning. Lastly, my final point, the one I spent the most time on, yes.
So, okay, are you saying that humanity nowadays, where we have like free internet and TikTok, is as advanced economically, scientifically, and politically, ethically
choose one.
In the caveman era?
Is advanced or is not advanced?
Is as advanced.
No.
And
Badgering. Lastly, my final point. I, as an international student, not meeting the allegations. As growing up, I had 10 au pairs. 3 of these au pairs, however, got fired. The first one was siphoning money from my family to fund their shopping addiction. The second had an inclination for the old colorful pill, the old adult candy, Xanax, and an assortment of other drugs not recreational or medicinally legal in the state of California. The third one, however, a minute left, was I dare say a vegan. Now the roles and responsibilities of the au pair in my family was simple: watch the kids, drive the kids around, and lastly, make dinner for my 2 working parents and my sister and I. This au pair was a vegan. My family was not vegan. We had a rich meat including dinners each and every night. So to set the scene, it is 8-year-old me, this au pair, in our kitchen at home. The vegan refused to touch any meat product. She made me, the 8-year-old, who should have been doing their math homework, was marinate and rub this pork loin. The au pair would go as far as to refuse to touch the packaging in the grocery store. So 8-year-old me was not only losing time for my homework, my swim lessons, and my afternoon playground time, I was in the grocery store, in the kitchen, putting food on the table due to this inefficient vegan. Out of time. Now you may be wondering, are myself and my parents terrible people? No, there's another irrelevant fact that contributed to this au pair being fired. Not only was she vegan, she also couldn't drive. In the urban sprawl that is the Bay Area, driving is something you must do. She lied. The inability of this vegan au pair to drive, however, did not stop her from driving. In her first week, she ran 7 red lights, missed 15 exits, and got in a total of 3 fender benders in our family's poor 2005 Toyota Camry. So at the end of this week, this lying, bad driving vegan au pair had her bags packed and was on her flight back home. So the side that the proposition brings up is one that believes in this false moral supremacy that is the belief of animal rights vegans adopt, a side that believes in stifling the innovation of humanity, and lastly, a side that supports au pairs that steal money, do illegal and deadly drugs, a terrible driver, jobless, and lastly, a vegan. I implore you, the House, to vote for opposition and let humanity evolve, let humanity rise above, and let humanity eat meat.
Okay, disclaimer. I'm going to do everything opposition has accused of proposition of doing. Alas, I'm just a girl. So, to write this speech, I asked a couple of people why they went vegan, and they said a lot of things. It's almost like they felt very passionately about it. So, I decided to be the paragon of virtue and speak on the behalf of the voiceless, aka my fellow vegans who aren't here today. That seems to be a trend of veganism, but that's fine. Okay, so what did they say? One person said they went vegan because they were far too popular and they needed a good reason not to be invited to dinner. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a problem people in this chamber have, so we're going to dismiss that argument. Someone else said they went vegan because they didn't like having the multitude of options at a restaurant, so now they get to eat the one vegan option they have. It's a trade-off, but I suppose they really didn't like making decisions. And then, before I get to my favorite answer, I have a question for the audience. How many people here think they're morally superior to a racist? Whoa, that's a good portion. Okay. So, at first, I laughed. I was like, ha ha ha, that's really funny because vegans can be funny, what a surprise. And then I thought about it for a little and I was like,
this actually leads to a pretty good argument. So my favorite answer was, being vegan makes you morally superior to people, and we like that. So back to the question I asked. The issue with being racist is that we treat people differently based on arbitrary values such as skin color, but the same thing applies to animals. We treat them differently based on arbitrary notions of love and family we associate with them. By applying the same moral framework to all animals, vegans are less racist. We're better. No. Okay. So vegans are morally superior to everyone else, but I think that concludes debate, but I'll keep talking because I have time. So morals are basically the standards of what are right and wrong, but to have right and wrong, we need to have choice. So people in the past ate meat to survive. That's not morally wrong because there's no choice. People did what they had to survive. However, there is a choice now. We don't need to depend on meat to live. We don't need to eat our 2 hard-boiled eggs in the morning to survive. Eating animal products is purely for pleasure, like we've established. Yeah, so all of us vegans are super, super healthy, we're alive, so it just shows that meat isn't essential for survival. And considering Op has mentioned an OPR, which I don't know what it is, but surely that means they have enough money to make a choice. So there's that. So if there's a choice, that inherently means that there's a better choice to make. So I have a little scenario for you. We have a terrorist, and they have information we desperately need. We have 2 choices. 1, torture them to get the information we need, or 2nd, get the information through other viable channels that are certain to work. Slightly extreme example, but it seems quite clear that we can avoid torturing the poor guy. If we can, we should avoid it, because torturing him causes unnecessary pain. So in this example, the terrorist is an animal, and the information we desperately need is food. And we can attain food without torturing an animal. We probably should do it.
POA?
Yeah.
What if I enjoy torturing them?
I feel like that's a different issue, and maybe not moral. You don't count. Okay. So you may ask, what's the proof that animals are being harmed? Well, I feel like that's pretty evident. 1, look into the world, watch a few documentaries. 2, if you want a reason, capitalism is probably a good reason. So in the past, if you wanted meat, you would hunt it yourself. If you wanted to drink your liter of milk, you go milk the cow. The consumption of animal products was limited. You wouldn't gorge yourself on chicken tenders because the number of chickens was limited. But now the way society is structured has changed. We have more access to all of these animal products. You could eat as many turkeys as you wanted, being limited only by money and perhaps your stomach. So this ease for animal products and their consumption is only possible through capitalism. And capitalism doesn't care about these animals beyond their consumption. So this means capitalism is going to find the cheapest and fastest way to get what they want. So what does this look like? Side proposition has illustrated this quite a bit. So it looks like you breed animals so they grow really fast and they get to be really fat, which means they have health issues, painful lives, they die. We don't like that. Okay. It looks like you're pumping animals full of hormones so they produce more milk because you want more milk because you can make more money. So capitalism inherently means you create systems that have worse animals. So shockingly, animals can feel pain, and all of this hurts them. So 2 things have been proven. Yeah.
What's your basis that animals can feel pain?
Have you tried stepping on a dog's foot?
No.
Yeah. So I think they can feel pain. So 2 things have been proven. Animal products aren't necessary for consumption, and the derivation of animal products is pretty gruesome, and we don't like it. So why does this mean vegans are morally superior? No, thank you. Because it limits the harms caused to other sentient beings by not consuming them. So by moving beyond arbitrary categorizations of value based on the usefulness of significance of these animals to humans. So for example, cows give us milk. We eat pigs. I don't eat my dog because it loves me. My goldfish doesn't love me, but I don't eat it because it entertains me, and somehow it's my brother. So by refusing to subscribe to all of these artificial conditions and social norms, vegans have transcended the materialistic world. We're evolved. We're better at being human than non-vegans. We're different. Something that opposition has brought up is that lions kill gazelles, so humans are justified in killing animals, but humans are also better than animals because we eat them. So I feel like there's a bit of a discordance there. You can't do things because animals do them and also not be animals. So we're just saying vegans are better than all of you guys because we don't do that. Okay, so the world is a pretty gross place to be right now. Climate change, capitalism, being poor, all of those tragic things. And being vegan is taking a deliberative stance against all of these atrocities. We sacrifice carnal pleasures for the greater good. Vegans choose ethics over convenience and live according to what they think is right. It's like, maybe, like, vegan cheese is disgusting, but at least I'm not, like, hurting that poor cow over there. I'm sacrificing something for the betterment of humanity. Obviously, that makes me a better person. So other people might whinge about the atrocities of life, but vegans are actually doing something. Being vegan is an active rejection of harm rather than a passive acceptance. So vegans, to conclude, are morally superior beings. So just end, the next time you tear into a piece of chicken, just know you've chosen your chicken over making the world a better place. Thank you.
That will be important to my speech. Sorry, just give me a... In 1970, when he was working in London, a British journalist named Aubryn Waugh got a telephone call. And on this call, he received an invitation to speak in Lagos, Nigeria, on the subject of breastfeeding in Africa. Now, Aubryn Waugh was a bit confused. I mean, he was a journalist, not a doctor, so he didn't really know why they were asking him to this event. But for whatever reason, he accepted the invitation. And so he researched, he consulted medical journals, he probably got a few weird looks in the library, but he put together this speech about breastfeeding. However, when he arrived in Lagos, he found out on the morning of the speech that there'd been a bit of a misunderstanding, and that some critical details had gotten lost in translation over the phone. It turned out that he had actually been asked to give a speech about press freedom in Africa. Now, not being a particularly versatile speaker, he decided that he was just going to commit to the bit. And he delivered to a slightly confused, but certainly very engaged audience, his 2-hour speech about breastfeeding. And the crowd honestly seemed to appreciate it. It made headlines, and he was asked back the following year to give an actual speech about press freedom. Now, the reason I bring this up is because when I received an invitation to speak in this debate, there was also a bit of a misunderstanding. I was originally supposed to be speaking in favor of the proposition supporting veganism. But I think Tom changed me to opposition since the twink soy boy allegations were already getting pretty bad without me having to, like, defend tofu. I mean, I don't think breast milk Ben is much better, but you can't win them all. So when I found out this morning that I was speaking on the opposition, I decided, like Aubryn Waugh, to more or less stick to what I was originally going to talk about. So I'm not going to stand up here and make arguments about why veganism is bad. Ultimately, I think anything that reduces animal cruelty and helps the climate is a pretty hard thing to argue against. Like, I think Lachlan and Sanvi are just correct this evening. And regardless, for a debate about animal rights, both teams proved surprisingly willing to just beat this debate like a dead horse. So I think most of the main arguments have already been made. So instead of making an anti-vegan argument tonight, I want to ask a question. And that question is this. If veganism is so good, like the propositions say, why aren't most of us vegan? And I think this is a very important question to ask, because social movements are typically quite bad at understanding why people don't agree with them. There's a tendency to paint anyone that disagrees with the social movement as brainwashed, stupid, or just morally inferior. And maybe you might say this is true, but regardless, it's just not a productive way to go about activism. So I think we do need to ask ourselves why most of us aren't vegan. And as I put together this speech in the back of my politics tutorial a few hours ago, I'll take it later, on Marx, by the way, because, woke king, the answer I came up with as to why most people weren't vegan is that most of us genuinely just couldn't be arsed. I'm serious. Meat and animal products just taste nice, or at the very least, we're so used to eating them that reshaping our diet, changing how we get our food, and researching how to get the necessary nutrients while still going vegan just seems like a lot of effort. And when the benefits of that effort aren't tangible and immediate, like you never see the animals that you save, most people just don't find the motivation to make the switch and go vegan. It's also just very easy to get caught up in the million different things we've got going on in our lives and never really stop to think seriously about issues like animal rights and never stop to zoom out and assess how the way we live our lives affects the world around us. Most of us have so many competing things to monopolize our attention, stress us out, and keep us busy. We already have so much to crash out about, like, the utter lack of fringe submissions about anyone in the Hist, the woke left daring to criticize feminist queen and Lawsock fan favorite Theresa May, John Pork's wrongful arrest and illegal detention, and now that's animal cruelty. So I don't think it's that we wake up one morning and decide that we're never going to go vegan. I think it's just that most of us never really think about it at all and make a decision. I mean, there's also the risk of just being labeled woke and annoying. Just look at woke vegan Hazel over there, sitting like a leftist. Notions, I don't want that shit. There's also no way the lads would invite a vegan on their annual trip to Send It in Arc Bar. The BlackRock Union membership would be instantly revoked. I've heard Towers of Chang aren't cruelty-free either. But before I go on.
Do you like going on lads trips?
Yeah, look at me. So these factors all combine to create a situation where most of us just couldn't be arsed going vegan. To be honest though, I'm really not sure how good a reason that is. I think anything worth doing is difficult, and if people in past generations weren't really arsed about making change, we wouldn't have most of the freedoms we do today. Just think back about all the people who had to make real efforts to fight for the privileges and rights we take for granted today. If Tom Francis wasn't arsed mewing for us every Wednesday, we wouldn't get to see such a lux-maxed king. If animal rights activist Chief Keef gave up when things got tough, we never would have received the 4-minute ecstasy that is Love Sosa. If Jenny Maguire hadn't worked to drown that Ron guy in the swimming pool, we'd never have whoever the next SU president is, I honestly forget. But look, I am ultimately speaking in opposition this evening, so I'm not saying that we should all go vegan. Changing something as fundamental as your diet can be very tough, but I am saying that we should all probably make an effort to do something. You really don't have to look too hard at the world to realize that there's a whole lot of problems that need a whole lot of solutions. Now, maybe your something, your contribution, your solution isn't veganism. Maybe it has nothing to do with animal rights or climate change. There are unfortunately so many other issues to choose from and fight for. Maybe your something is volunteering once a week with a charity. Maybe it's joining a protest for an issue you care about. Maybe it's donating blood. Maybe it's something else entirely. Whatever it is, the most important thing, I think, is that we all just do something. And that's not to say that you'll save the world. But when history comes to judge us, I'd at least like to look back on us as a generation of people that at least tried. And that doesn't have to mean that we need to become a generation of vegans. As I've said, there are a million other ways to make a genuine difference. But it does mean that we should strive to become a generation of people that each made an effort to stand up and do something. Thank you.
I love meat. I eat almost every day. In fact, I eat it so much I can confidently say I can fit 2 sausages in my mouth without even gagging. So I think I can talk with a little bit of authority on this topic. I only have, 3 minutes to speak, so allow me to make a case that while yes, our current farming and eating habits are not sustainable, full-on veganism is probably not the best alternative. Individually, a vegan diet does have a small impact on the environment. However, on a much larger scale, a purely vegan diet can cause harm to the environment in different ways. With more vegans comes more demand for water-intensive crops such as soy, almonds, and avocados. Demand for these will lead to deforestation of land and to make way for new farms. This will only exacerbate a problem already seen in many parts of the world, such as the US, soil erosion. According to a study done by scientific journal Catena, cultivated lands and other vegetated lands contribute to roughly 90% of all soil degradation across the US. I'm willing to bet these figures are similar in other countries of the world. As more people are infected with veganism, this problem will only get worse. Let me summarize the long-term effects this will have on the environment. lower agricultural productivity, increased water loss, and no thank you, and more CO2 in the atmosphere due to reduced storage capacity of our soil. This leads to another major problem that would affect the quality of food and therefore our health, the reliance on chemical fertilizers. As soil is cultivated, it loses its nutrients, and plants have a much harder time growing. As fertilizers are introduced to keep the soil fertile, nutrient imbalance, such as a lack of minerals, appear in our food, which can impact our health. Yeah? What? Okay. Chemical fertilizers also have heavy metals such as cadmium and lead, which run the risk of kidney damage, and if ingested enough, can even cause cancer. So I've listed a few reasons why a strict vegan diet can hurt the environment, so now I should elaborate on why inclusion of our meat in our diet can actually have a positive impact on the environment. Sticking with the point of fertilizer, animal manure provides a natural fertilizer that doesn't have many of the aforementioned drawbacks that I mentioned earlier. Livestock can have a small impact on the environment if their grazing habits are much more sustainable compared to the industrial grade crops needed to sustain a world of vegans. Of course, those methods are a far cry from the industrial grade farming that we see today. As I said before, veganism does tend to have a smaller impact on the environment. Hell, raising animals requires 77% of the world's agricultural land, but only provides about 18% of the world's calories. But as I've shown, that doesn't mean that veganism is completely sustainable either. The answer to the vegan question shouldn't be no meat consumption, but more informed meat consumption. Before we are humans, we are consumers, and less importantly, we are voters, meaning that we ultimately have the power to change many of the harmful farming practices that impact our climate and our everyday health. Thank you.
Okay, so this debate has been massively biased towards capitalism because basically we have been debating, should we consume this meat or should we not consume this meat? I think this is a false dilemma and I'm going to argue for it. We should just, this house should run away from veganism because it's not the only alternative. Now, I have two basic things that I'm going to cover. Now, firstly, not everything grows everywhere. Not everything grows in your local Lidl, okay? Meat grows almost everywhere, okay? And tomatoes, almost everything you buy comes from all over the earth. The vegetable things that you buy come from all over the earth. You're basically selling yourself to this geopolitical situation right now and to huge corporations that move all of these things away and to you. So, and now, I'm just going to propose that moving away from meat, okay, separates us from the idea of autosufficiency, okay? Because if you forget that it's possible to kill your own pig and to eat your own pig, you are forced by yourself, you are forcing yourself to be a chronic consumer. You are going to be consuming all the time from people who have the power to provide their food for you. Now, you might say, no, thank you. The scale of people who raise and kill their own pigs, it's pretty low. Yes, but we all know that it's possible. And forgetting that it's a possibility is just a further step towards capitalism. Okay, no, sorry. Okay, we are still animals, and we shouldn't feel like we are better than the other animals. We have talked about ending the climate crisis, we have talked about ending suffering, and I think this is just a power trip. And it is just a symptom of capitalism trying to convince us that through consuming, we can bridge the gap between being at fault of climate change, being at fault of suffering, and being in charge. Think capitalism trying to convince us that buying all these pills, these supplements, these vegetables that come from all over the world, we can actually change the impact of living in this earth, of having this flesh that ties us to suffering. So, so yes, basically my main point is this is a false dilemma, this is a trap of capitalism that we're falling into by trying to convert ourselves into vegans, and it brings a lot of logistical problems that come with living on Earth that are just not addressed by veganism. So, thank you.
Sorry for using my phone, my computer died, so ignore how weird I look. But I implore this House to oppose the motion of going vegan. Think about the animals. Without food production, do we imagine cows set free in some liberation movement? Chickens roaming the streets? Pigs queuing up for oat milk cappuccinos? Let's be clear. Voting for veganism isn't voting for animal welfare, it's voting for animal elimination. Because if an animal has no use to us, we will stop allowing it to breed. Its species fades out. Look at what we already do to animals we consider useless or even just decorative, wiping them out whenever is convenient to us. Even those of us who try to help those animals, is it really sustainable if we get no resources in return? Thus, we must decide, is extinction more ethical than existence? Instead of running to the extremes, let's aim for sustainable balance. Pasture-raised, grass-fed, regenerative farming. Animals raised with care, in harmony with the land, not in spite of it. Yes, they will eventually die, so will all of us. But isn't a meaningful life followed by a swift death better than no life at all? And lastly, let's not forget that not all plant farming is harmless. Almond milk, a water-guzzling monoculture. Avocados, flown in from across the world with a bigger carbon footprint than a steak from a local farmer. No, thank you. This isn't about clinging to bacon for comfort. It's about choosing a world where humans coexist with animals, not erase them. So no, this House should not go vegan. It should go thoughtful, it should go sustainable, but it must not go extinct. And neither should the animals we've lived alongside for thousands of years. Thank you.